Welcome, everyone, to today's Explainer. We're tackling a subject today that literally shapes how we interact with the entire world, the fundamental theories of language. I mean, we all use language every single day, right? But have you ever stopped to actually ask yourself, what is it, really? Because how we answer that one specific question completely changes how we learn and teach it. To kick things off, let's look at this humorous quote from the playwright George Bernard Shaw. England and America are two countries separated by a common language. It really perfectly illustrates how incredibly tricky language can be. Even when two groups supposedly speak the exact same tongue, the nuances, the context, the culture, it all makes it entirely different. Language isn't just some simple mathematical code. It's a vast, messy, and honestly beautiful human phenomenon. I think we've all been in this exact position, haven't we? Sitting in a classroom somewhere surrounded by massive stacks of books, just facing the absolute mystery of how to decode a brand new language. You've got conjugations, never-ending vocabulary lists, bizarre pronunciation rules. It's overwhelming. That feeling of being totally stumped is exactly the mystery we are unpacking today. To solve that mystery, we really have to ask two monumental questions. First, what is a language? And second, what does it mean to learn a language? What exactly does someone learn when they're learning one? And listen, these are just high-level philosophical musings. Over the past century, the answers to these two specific questions have generated entirely different teaching methodologies around the globe. So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. First, what is a language? Then we'll dive into the three main theoretical buckets: the structural view, the functional view, and the interactional view. Finally, we'll wrap up with how all of this shapes how we actually learn. All right, part one. What is a language? Unpacking the foundation of communication. Which brings us right into part two, the structural view, seeing language as a strict linguistic system. So your core belief about what language fundamentally is directly dictates how you're going to teach it. If you went to a traditional school, this first view is probably what you experienced. The structural view essentially sees language as a linguistic system made up of various subsystems, and, this is crucial, it has a finite number of structural items. It's highly logical. Think of it like a massive box of Legos. There are only so many shapes and sizes in that box, and the theory is if you just memorize every shape, you can build absolutely anything. Under this view, language is broken down into incredibly specific, almost scientific building blocks. First up, you've got your phonological units, the basic sounds, or phonemes. Then grammatical units, like phrases and clauses. You also have grammatical operations, like taking an active sentence and transforming it into a passive one. And finally, lexical items, which is basically just your vocabulary. So if language is just finite pieces, learning it simply means memorizing these structural items so you can produce the language. Well, how does that actually look in a classroom? The audiolingual method and total physical response, or TPR, embody this structural view perfectly. If you have ever tried to learn a language by listening to a tape say, "The cat is on the mat," and you just repeat it back 50 times, or by having a teacher shout commands like "stand up" and "sit down," you've experienced this view firsthand. It is all about mastering those structural items through sheer repetition. Okay, part three, the functional view. This is where we start looking at language as a means of doing things. The functional view says, hey, language isn't just a linguistic system of rules. It's a vehicle for the expression of functional meaning. This theory argues that just knowing the grammar and the phonemes, that simply isn't enough. You're learning a language specifically to accomplish actual tasks in the real world. The language is just the vehicle that gets you to your destination. Think about your day-to-day life for a second. Most of what you do involves functional activities. You're inviting people out for coffee, making dentist appointments, asking for directions, suggesting a restaurant, or apologizing for being late. Under this view, just memorizing the vocabulary words for left and right isn't going to cut it. You need to learn the specific functional phrase like, "Excuse me, could you tell me the way to the station?" It is highly practical. Learners have to know how to combine those grammatical rules and vocabulary specifically to perform these exact daily functions. And this functional perspective directly birthed some very targeted teaching methods. Both the communicative movement in language teaching, as well as English for specific purposes, or ESP, have their genesis right here. Think about English for specific purposes for a moment. If you're training to be an air traffic controller, you need a very specific set of functional language to do your job safely. And that is vastly different from the functional language, say, a hotel receptionist needs. The learning is entirely focused on the actual utility of the words. Moving on to part four,
the interactional view. Language as a communicative tool for social relations.
Now, the interactional view considers language as a communicative tool whose main use is to build up and maintain social relations and to perform social transactions between people. This is a massive, massive shift from the other two. This view says that beyond just completing a functional task, like ordering a coffee, language is fundamentally about negotiating human relationships.
To actually master this, a learner has a whole lot more on their plate. Yes, obviously, they still need to know the grammar and the vocabulary, but they also need the contextual rules. It's about understanding the unwritten rules of negotiation, knowing how to politely disagree with your boss versus how to openly argue with your best friend. It's entirely about reading the room. This theory focuses heavily on conversational exchanges and really understanding those complex patterns of moves and acts in widely varied communicative contexts.
Because this view focuses on deep, complex social interaction, it naturally leads to highly immersive teaching styles. Things like task-based language teaching, or TBLT, and content-language integrated learning, CLIL, draw directly on this view. So instead of just practicing a sentence on a whiteboard, you might be put in a group and told to plan a hypothetical trip to Paris together using only the target language. You aren't just drilling vocabulary, you're actively negotiating, agreeing, and interacting with other human beings to achieve a shared goal. Finally, Part 5, Shaping How We Learn. Let's take all this theory and see how it dictates methodology in the real world. Honestly, it all boils down to this one incredible comparison. Your core belief about the nature of language completely alters what language learning actually is. If language is viewed as having finite structural items, those Lego blocks we talked about, then learning simply means memorizing those items. But if language is seen as a communicative tool, then to learn the language means you must actively use it to perform functions. The theory literally is the practice. When you lay these theories side by side, the contrast is just fascinating. View language as a structural system, and you get the rote repetition of the audiolingual method. View it as a functional vehicle, and you get targeted, highly practical methods like English for specific purposes. But view it as an interactional tool for social connection, and you end up with immersive, collaborative methods like task-based language teaching. It's three distinct views leading to three completely different classroom experiences. To wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative question straight from the text to ponder. Discuss the structural, functional, and interactional views of language. How do these views influence language teaching methodology? Think back to your very own language learning experiences for a second. Based on what we've unpacked today, which of these three views was your teacher relying on? And honestly, more importantly, did it actually work for you? Keep learning, and thanks so much for joining me today.